Hi everyone. Detective Lefebre speaks. It was 4 p.m. when Rachel Walker made the frantic call to the police. Her daughter, Sophie Walker, hadn't returned home from school. Normally, Sophie would walk the same route every day, a 15-minute journey along quiet suburban streets. Rachel explained that Sophie was punctual to a fault, never late unless she stopped to chat with a friend or neighbor, and even then, she'd call or text. The fact that Sophie hadn't contacted her mother set off immediate alarm bells. Rachel tried calling Sophie's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Panicked, she retraced Sophie's usual path but found no sign of her. Rachel's voice cracked with desperation as she described Sophie. She was wearing her pink jacket, a purple backpack, and her favorite sneakers, the ones with the stars on the sides. The local police treated the report as a potential child abduction and issued an Amber Alert. Officers began canvassing the area, interviewing residents and searching nearby parks and alleys. I was called in as a consultant, knowing time was of the essence. The first 48 hours in a missing child case are critical. Beyond that, the chances of recovery diminish dramatically. The first step was reconstructing Sophie's last known movements. Officers interviewed parents, teachers, and children at Sophie's school. The dismissal bell rang at 3:10 p.m., and multiple students saw Sophie leaving the school gate at 3:15 p.m. Witnesses described her walking alone, waving to friends as she began her route home. One neighbor, Mrs. Harper, provided a crucial detail. She had seen Sophie pass her house around 3:20 p.m. She was smiling, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders, Harper said. She looked happy. Harper's house was about halfway along Sophie's usual route. At that point, everything appeared normal. However, Sophie never reached the next checkpoint, another neighbor's house with a security camera that would have captured her walking by. This gap between 3:20 p.m. and the next surveillance marker became the focal point. Somewhere in that window, Sophie had vanished. Analyzing surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses, we found the last known image of Sophie. A doorbell camera recorded her walking past at 3:25 p.m. The footage showed her glancing back over her shoulder, her pace quickening slightly, as though she had noticed something or someone. 2 minutes later, at 3:27 p.m., another surveillance camera from a gas station captured a critical moment. Sophie was seen stopping near a white van parked on the side of the road. The footage was grainy but showed Sophie hesitating, then taking a step toward the van before disappearing from the camera's view. Moments later, the van pulled away, heading toward a rural road leading out of town. The van, a white Dodge Caravan with no rear license plate, became the prime lead in the case. Witnesses described it as older, with a dent on the driver's side door. The absence of a license plate suggested premeditation. The driver had taken steps to avoid detection. Officers immediately issued a bolo, "Be on the lookout," for the van. Descriptions of the vehicle were broadcast across neighboring counties, and traffic camera footage was analyzed to track its movements. The van was last seen on a camera heading toward a rural area outside Brookhaven, a sparsely populated region known for its dense woods and winding roads. This route suggested the driver had local knowledge. There were no major highways or through roads in that direction. The van seemed to vanish into the wilderness. The calculated removal of the license plate, coupled with the rural destination, pointed to a suspect who had planned this abduction carefully. I worked with analysts to cross-reference the description of the van against vehicle registrations in the area. Several possible matches came up, but one stood out. A Dodge Caravan registered to Frank Marlowe, a man with a troubling criminal history. Frank Marlowe was a former delivery driver who lived alone in a secluded farmhouse on the outskirts of Brookhaven. 5 years earlier, he had been arrested for attempting to lure a child into his vehicle but avoided conviction due to lack of evidence. The description of his vehicle and his familiarity with rural roads made him an immediate person of interest. We began building a profile of Marlowe. He was a loner, described by neighbors as quiet and standoffish. He rarely interacted with others and kept odd hours. His prior behavior suggested he was methodical and opportunistic, someone who watched for vulnerabilities before striking. The fact that Sophie's route was predictable may have made her an easy target for someone like him. While Marlowe's history raised suspicion, we needed evidence to connect him to Sophie's disappearance. Surveillance teams were dispatched to monitor his farmhouse while investigators worked to gather more information. Time was running out, and the van's disappearance into the rural stretch suggested Sophie could be nearby. But for how long? With the white Dodge Caravan as the key lead, the team combed through traffic camera footage in a 20-mile radius from where Sophie was last seen. A breakthrough came when a camera on a rural road captured the van heading toward an unmarked dirt path. This area was surrounded by dense woods, abandoned buildings, and a scattering of old farmhouses. Officers mapped the dirt path and discovered it led to only a handful of properties, most of them isolated and difficult to access. One of these properties was linked to Frank Marlowe, the suspect whose profile fit the crime. The van's disappearance into this area heightened suspicions that Sophie could be hidden nearby. While surveillance teams monitored Marlowe's farmhouse, I reviewed the profiles of other individuals in the area with histories of violence or child exploitation. Brookhaven, though small, had its share of dark secrets. A few names came up, but none matched the combination of factors surrounding Marlowe. His prior attempt at child luring, his ownership of a vehicle matching the van's description, and his residence along the suspected route. Marlowe's neighbors described him as reclusive, often driving late at night and avoiding interactions. A retired farmer who lived a mile away recalled seeing Marlowe's van heading down the dirt path the evening Sophie disappeared. This eyewitness account further solidified Marlowe as our prime suspect. The breakthrough came when search teams scouring the area around the dirt road found Sophie's pink backpack discarded in a ditch. Inside were her school books, a small snack, and a receipt from a convenience store. The receipt was time-stamped just over an hour before Sophie's disappearance, proving she had been carrying the backpack at the time. The backpack's placement felt deliberate. It was dropped just off the road, hidden from plain view. This suggested the abductor had wanted to conceal it, but hadn't taken the time to ensure it wouldn't be found. It also hinted that Sophie might still be alive, as the abductor seemed focused on erasing her trail rather than disposing of evidence completely. The receipt from Sophie's backpack was traced to a convenience store 10 miles from Brookhaven. Surveillance footage from the store provided a critical lead. Frank Marlowe was captured on camera purchasing duct tape, rope, and snacks. He was wearing dark clothing and seemed agitated, avoiding eye contact with the cashier. Even more damning, Marlowe had paid in cash and left in a white Dodge Caravan that matched the description of the suspect vehicle. The timestamp on the receipt placed him near the time of Sophie's disappearance, and the items he purchased suggested preparation for holding someone captive. This was enough to justify escalating the investigation and securing a warrant for his property. While waiting for the warrant, surveillance teams closely monitored Marlowe's farmhouse. The property was isolated, surrounded by dense woods, and difficult to access without being noticed. Marlowe was seen moving in and out of his home but showed no signs of distress or panic. He appeared to be maintaining his routines, which included short trips in his van to the edge of his property. The van itself was parked in his garage, its rear obscured from view. No lights were visible in the basement or other parts of the home, but Marlowe's calm demeanor was unsettling. If Sophie was inside, he was confident enough to act as though nothing was wrong. Or he believed he had covered his tracks so well that we wouldn't find her. The sense of urgency was palpable. Every passing hour increased the risk that Sophie's situation could escalate, especially if Marlowe felt cornered. The evidence we had was compelling, but until we obtained the warrant and searched the farmhouse, Sophie's fate remained uncertain. When the warrant was finally secured, officers and forensic teams moved in on Marlowe's farmhouse at dawn. The property was eerily quiet as the team breached the front door. Marlowe, seated in the living room, seemed unfazed by the intrusion. "I don't know what you're looking for," he said with a smirk. His nonchalance was chilling. While Marlowe was taken into custody, investigators searched the house. The living room and kitchen were cluttered but unremarkable. However, the basement revealed a disturbing scene. Soundproofed walls, restraints, and a steel bed bolted to the floor. Forensic luminol testing revealed faint traces of blood on the mattress, though it was unclear whether it belonged to Sophie. Children's clothing was found in a locked chest, but none of the items matched Sophie's description. This confirmed Marlowe's predatory tendencies and suggested he had targeted children before. The basement reinforced our fear that Sophie had been held captive here, but her current whereabouts remained unknown. The white Dodge Caravan, parked in Marlowe's garage, became the focal point of the investigation. Forensic experts meticulously examined the vehicle. Inside the rear compartment, they found blonde hair strands and a pink hair clip that Rachel Walker identified as belonging to Sophie. Additionally, dirt and leaves found in the van's tires matched samples collected near the ditch where Sophie's backpack was discovered. This tied Marlowe directly to the scene. Combined with the surveillance footage from the convenience store, this was enough to establish him as the abductor. Yet, Sophie herself remained missing, and Marlowe refused to talk during initial questioning. Marlowe sat across from me in the stark interrogation room, his demeanor smug and defiant. "You've got nothing," he said with a casual shrug. His confidence stemmed from years of evading consequences for his past behavior. He refused to answer questions about Sophie, maintaining that he had no idea who she was. Marlowe's body language and tone suggested he enjoyed the attention, relishing the psychological control. To break him, I needed to challenge his ego. "You've left a trail, Frank," I said, sliding photographs of the hair clip, the convenience store footage, and the basement restraints across the table. "You're not as clever as you think. We're already closing in on Sophie. The question is, how long do you want to sit here before you tell us where she is?" For the first time, Marlowe's expression flickered, an almost imperceptible twitch of his jaw. While he didn't respond, I sensed a crack in his composure. Time was running out, but Marlowe was showing signs of pressure. I enlisted the help of a behavioral psychologist to refine our approach to Marlowe. His arrogance and smugness indicated a need for control and superiority, common traits in predatory individuals. The psychologist advised leveraging his ego and presenting him as a key player in solving the case, rather than cornering him outright. During the next round of questioning, I shifted tactics. "Frank, I know you're not like other guys who get caught. You planned this. You're careful. We've seen your setup." I paused, letting the flattery sink in. "But if we find Sophie without you, the story will be that you failed. Is that what you want?" Marlowe leaned forward slightly, intrigued but not yet ready to confess. The psychologist's strategy was working. He was starting to see cooperation as a way to maintain a semblance of control. While processing evidence from the van, investigators found a crumpled piece of paper under the driver's seat. Unfolding it revealed a simple, childlike drawing of a house with a tree beside it. Sophie's teacher confirmed it was hers. She had drawn it during art class earlier that week. This drawing was a clue. The house didn't match Marlowe's farmhouse, suggesting Sophie had been moved to a different location. The inclusion of a tree hinted at a distinct landmark, potentially near where she was being held. Marlowe's refusal to cooperate forced us to rely on this slim lead to guide our search. Armed with Sophie's drawing and Marlowe's growing discomfort, I returned to the interrogation room. "We've got her trail, Frank," I said, sliding the drawing across the table. "This is where she is, isn't it? You know what will happen when we find her, and you're still sitting here pretending to be in control." Marlowe's eyes lingered on the drawing for a moment before he leaned back in his chair, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "You think you know everything," he muttered. "You don't." I pressed further, continuing to needle at his pride. "Then why don't you tell us what we don't know? Show us how smart you really are." The gamble worked. Marlowe finally broke. "She's at the hunting cabin," he said, his voice cold but steady. "You won't get there in time." The location Marlowe described, a hunting cabin deep in the woods, was registered to his uncle, who had passed away years earlier. The property was isolated, miles from the nearest paved road, and surrounded by dense forest. Officers immediately mobilized a tactical rescue team, knowing Sophie's life was on the line. The cabin was difficult to access, with a single dirt road leading to its entrance. Drone footage confirmed that the property was intact, with no visible movement inside or outside. Officers approached cautiously, fearing booby traps or potential harm to Sophie. The rescue operation began just before dawn. The tactical team breached the cabin door, finding Sophie tied to a chair in the corner of the single-room structure. She was pale, visibly terrified, but unharmed. When officers untied her, Sophie clung to the lead officer, tears streaming down her face. The sight of her pink sneakers peeking out from under the chair was a heart-stopping moment for everyone involved. It was clear that her abductor had been preparing to keep her there long-term, as evidenced by the stocked supplies and restraints. Sophie was quickly transported to the hospital for evaluation, while the team secured the cabin for forensic analysis. The interior of the cabin provided chilling insights into Marlowe's plans. The small room contained minimal furniture, a cot, a table, and the chair Sophie had been restrained in. On the table were duct tape, rope, and a notebook filled with unsettling drawings of children, including crude sketches of Sophie's face and distinctive pink jacket. Food and water had been left for Sophie, suggesting Marlowe intended to keep her alive. However, the presence of a padlock and additional restraints hinted at a long-term captivity scenario. Forensic teams collected every piece of evidence, knowing the contents of the cabin would be crucial for the case against Marlowe. After receiving medical attention, Sophie was reunited with her family. Once she felt safe, she provided a statement about her abduction. Sophie described how Marlowe had approached her in his van, pretending to need help finding his lost dog. When she hesitated, he grabbed her and forced her into the vehicle. "He told me to be quiet, or he'd hurt me," Sophie said, her voice trembling. She recounted the terrifying ride to the cabin, where Marlowe tied her to the chair and told her she couldn't leave. Sophie remembered drawing the house with the tree as a way to distract herself and stay calm. Her courage in recalling the details helped solidify the timeline and filled in critical gaps in the investigation. With Sophie safe, the focus turned to building an ironclad case against Marlowe. A deeper dive into his past revealed he had been linked to several other child abduction attempts, though none had resulted in convictions. Witnesses from previous cases came forward, describing Marlowe's predatory behavior and his use of vehicles to lure children. Further investigation uncovered evidence that Marlowe had been planning this abduction for months. He had deliberately scouted Sophie's school route, noting her predictable schedule and the lack of adult supervision. The items found in his basement and cabin suggested he had committed similar acts before but had successfully erased evidence until now. With Sophie safe and recovering, the focus shifted to ensuring Frank Marlowe faced justice. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, forensic links to the van and the cabin, Sophie's testimony, and the chilling setup in his basement. Prosecutors meticulously built their case, using every piece of evidence to leave no doubt of Marlowe's guilt. Sophie's parents wrestled with the decision to allow her to testify. Ultimately, they agreed, knowing her courage and direct account of the events would help convict Marlowe. Trauma counselors worked with Sophie to prepare her, ensuring she understood the process and felt supported. The trial was a highly publicized event, with reporters following every detail. Sophie's testimony was a heart-wrenching moment. In a calm but trembling voice, she recounted the abduction, describing how Marlowe lured her with the lie about his lost dog. "I was scared," Sophie said, clutching a stuffed animal for comfort. "But I kept thinking, if I'm quiet and careful, maybe someone will find me." The prosecution presented the extensive forensic evidence, including DNA from Sophie's hair in the van, the drawing found under the driver's seat, and the restraints in the cabin. The store footage showing Marlowe purchasing duct tape and rope shortly before Sophie's disappearance painted a clear picture of premeditation. Marlowe's defense attorney tried to argue that Sophie had misidentified her abductor and that the evidence was circumstantial. However, this claim fell apart under the weight of the facts and Sophie's unwavering testimony. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning their verdict: guilty on all counts. Marlowe was convicted of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and attempted assault, with additional charges stemming from his possession of tools and materials indicative of long-term captivity. The judge handed down the maximum sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Sophie's family broke into quiet tears of relief. Marlowe sat expressionless, his trademark smugness replaced by cold resignation. Though the case was resolved, Sophie's journey to recovery had just begun. She began attending therapy sessions to process her trauma and rebuild her sense of safety. Despite her ordeal, Sophie displayed remarkable resilience. She returned to school several months later, surrounded by a supportive community that rallied around her. Her parents, inspired by Sophie's bravery, started a foundation focused on protecting children from predators and raising awareness about child abduction. Sophie herself became a symbol of hope, demonstrating the power of courage and the strength of a loving family. The Sophie Walker case was a stark reminder of the importance of swift action, forensic expertise, and psychological insight in solving child abduction cases. Every piece of evidence, from a crumpled receipt to a child's drawing, played a vital role in saving Sophie's life and ensuring her abductor faced justice. For me, this case reaffirmed the power of teamwork and persistence. It was a race against time, where every minute counted and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Seeing Sophie reunite with her family was a rare and profound moment of triumph in a career often filled with darker outcomes. It's a case I'll never forget, not just because of the resolution, but because it underscored the unyielding importance of protecting the most vulnerable among us. If you like this story and want to watch more stories by Detective Lefebre, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below. Remember, the truth is in details.